Everyone thinks Japan is a dream. The glowing neon lights of Tokyo, the serene temples, the polite society, it all looks perfect from the outside. For tourists, it is. But for those who try to build a life here, especially as a foreigner, that dream can quietly turn into something much more complicated. Because behind Japan's polished image lies an invisible weight that few talk about, the quiet pressure to fit in, the silent stares that follow you on the train, the unwritten rules that no one will ever explain but everyone expects you to follow. It's not loud. It's not obvious. But it's always there. For many foreign nationals, living in Japan isn't just about adapting to a new place. It's about constantly navigating a maze of cultural expectations, workplace hierarchies, and social codes that seem impossible to crack. Even the simplest interactions, like knowing when to bow, or how much silence is too much, can feel like walking a tightrope. And the cost of getting it wrong? Isolation, misunderstandings, and in some cases, a slow-burning feeling that you'll never quite belong. But why is it so hard to integrate? What makes Japan, despite all its modernity, such a challenging place for outsiders to truly feel included? And what toll does that take on a person's career, mental health, and everyday life? Let's pull back the curtain and see what really happens when you're a foreigner trying to survive in Japan. You won't see it on a map. No one talks about it openly. But every foreigner in Japan runs into it eventually, the invisible wall that separates us from them. It's not built with bricks. It's built with customs, silence, and the tiniest unspoken expectations. Take the concept of uchisodo, the idea that there's an inside group and an outside group. It shapes everything, from conversations in the office to whether you get invited out for drinks after work. And if you're not Japanese, you're almost always on the outside. No matter how fluent your language skills are or how much effort you put into fitting in. Even everyday interactions feel like coded rituals. You're expected to bow at just the right angle, speak with just the right humility, read the room without being told what room you're in. It's not that anyone's being cruel. It's just that the rules are so ingrained, people assume you already know them. And when you don't, you're met with polite confusion or quiet exclusion. For foreigners, this creates a strange double life. On the surface, things seem calm and friendly, but underneath, there's often a creeping sense of being watched, measured, and judged. And here's the thing, no one will ever tell you you're doing it wrong. You'll just feel it. In the subtle body language. In the hesitation before someone speaks. In the jobs you don't get offered, or the promotions that never come. Even friendships can feel transactional or surface level. Because people are careful, not out of malice, but out of deeply rooted social conditioning. Getting truly close to someone takes years, if it happens at all. But this social barrier doesn't just affect your personal life, it bleeds into your career, your mental health, your sense of self. And if you think it gets easier over time, you might want to hear what happens when those workplace expectations hit next. If the social rules outside the office feel confusing, inside the workplace they become downright suffocating. For many foreign professionals, the first real culture shock in Japan doesn't come from sushi or crowded trains, it comes from stepping into a Japanese office. On paper, it sounds great: structure, order, respect for hierarchy. But in practice, it's a grind that chews up even the most determined outsiders. Let's start with the hours. You're expected to stay late, even if you've finished your work. Going home on time can be seen as selfish or lazy, especially if your boss is still at their desk. It's not about productivity, it's about presence. And for foreigners trying to prove they belong, the pressure to overperform is intense. Then there's the communication style. Forget everything you know about direct feedback or open discussion. In Japanese workplaces, everything runs on implication and politeness. You're expected to pick up on what's not being said, to read between the lines, and to never, ever be too assertive even when the situation demands it. This creates a minefield for foreign employees. Speak up, and you might be seen as too aggressive. Stay quiet, and you risk being overlooked. Even giving your opinion can backfire if it disrupts group harmony, what's known as wa. And in a culture where fitting in is prized over standing out, being different, especially visibly foreign, can feel like a disadvantage you can't shake. Promotion? That's another uphill battle. Many companies still prefer to promote from within, from those who've been part of the system for years, usually Japanese employees who started fresh out of university. If you didn't come up through that pipeline, or if you didn't graduate from a Japanese school, you might find yourself stuck in the same role, year after year, no matter how skilled or experienced you are. And let's not forget the pay gap. Reports suggest that foreign workers are often paid less than their Japanese peers, sometimes significantly less, even when doing the exact same job. But complaining? That's risky. Rocking the boat can lead to isolation, or worse, losing your position altogether. It's no wonder burnout is common among expats. Some even pack up and leave, saying it's just not worth the emotional toll. But for those who stay, this pressure often pushes them deeper into another difficult battle, trying to blend into a culture that's not designed to include them in the first place. And that struggle leads to something even more personal. You can speak the language. You can follow the rules. You can even bow at the perfect angle. But for many foreigners in Japan, none of that is enough. Because no matter how long you live there, you're always a guest. This quiet, constant reminder is what fuels one of the most draining parts of life in Japan for foreign nationals: cultural isolation. It's not just about being different, it's about being kept at a polite, but permanent, distance. Daily interactions can feel transactional. People are kind, but rarely close. Friendships often hover on the surface. And unless you're fluent, not just in Japanese, but in the cultural code, it's easy to feel like you're watching life from behind glass. It's called the gaijin bubble. A life surrounded by other foreigners and expat neighborhoods, with English menus, foreign bars, and international schools. On the surface, it feels safe, familiar, comfortable. But beneath it, it's a cage. Because while it protects you from rejection, it also cuts you off from true connection with Japanese society. And stepping outside of it means dealing with microaggressions, blank stares, and occasionally, outright rejection. Try renting an apartment. Some landlords will refuse you, not because of your credit score or your job, but because you're not Japanese. Try making friends at work. You might get invited to the occasional office party, but few will call you on the weekend. Try dating. For many, relationships are tinged with curiosity or exoticism, but rarely full inclusion. Even national holidays and festivals, some of the most vibrant parts of Japanese life, can feel like watching a play you're not allowed to join. You don't know the lines. You don't know the cues. And no one's really offering the script. And slowly, without even realizing it, you start to shrink. You socialize less. You stop trying to understand the deeper culture. You stay in your neighborhood, speaking your language, and living your routines. It's not because you want to be isolated. It's because trying to belong hurts more than giving up. And the result? A quiet, growing loneliness that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't lived it. But even isolation isn't the full story. Because beneath this cultural divide, there's something even more dangerous: not knowing your rights, or what to do when the system turns against you. You've made it to Japan. You've got a job, a visa, maybe even a nice apartment. But here's what no one tells you. The hardest part isn't getting in. It's surviving once you're here. For many foreign nationals, Japan becomes a financial and legal tightrope, one mistake away from everything falling apart. Let's start with money. Tokyo is one of the most expensive cities in the world. Even without rent, basic living expenses can easily hit 100,000 yen a month. That's about $700. Add in rent, health insurance, transportation, and taxes, and suddenly that decent-looking paycheck? It's already gone. But here's where it gets worse. Many foreign workers are hired on local contracts without the relocation packages or housing allowances that Japanese firms often provide their domestic staff. And in more cases than you'd think, foreigners doing the exact same job as their Japanese coworkers earn less, sometimes significantly less. Why? Because they're seen as temporary, replaceable, outside the system. And if that sounds unfair, it gets even more complicated when you look at the legal side. Japan has labor laws, anti-discrimination clauses, visa protections. But here's the problem: few foreigners even know their rights, and even fewer know how to enforce them. You might be facing unpaid overtime, unfair dismissal, or even racial bias in hiring or housing. But unless you speak fluent Japanese, know the exact legal process, and have the patience to navigate a mountain of bureaucracy, good luck getting justice. And many don't even try. They just take the hit and move on, fearing that speaking up might cost them their visa. Because that visa? It's the lifeline. Lose your job and you've got 3 months, max, to find a new one, or you're on a plane home. No appeals. No extensions. Just goodbye. And when it comes to housing, even if you have the money and paperwork, some landlords still say no, because you're not Japanese. They won't say it outright, but they'll ghost you or tell the agent, no foreigners, sorry. It's legal gray area, and it's rarely challenged. That's why so many foreigners end up clustered in certain neighborhoods, paying more for less, just to have a place that won't reject them. But perhaps the most dangerous thing about this legal and financial maze? It's silent. No one talks about it. There's no warning label. No guidebook. Just a slow, grinding realization you're on your own here. And yet, despite all this, the social pressure, the work culture, the isolation, the legal landmines, people stay. Why? The answer lies in the quiet power of community, identity, and the unexpected ways people learn to fight back. Every foreigner who's lived in Japan long enough has a moment, sometimes weeks, sometimes months in, where they look around and think, why didn't anyone warn me about this? It's not the sushi, or the trains, or even the bowing. It's the small, constant, unexpected struggles that pile up quietly until one day they hit like a wave. Things like trying to open a bank account only to be told you need a phone number first, but to get a phone number, you need a bank account. Or finding the perfect apartment only for the landlord to say, no foreigners. No reason. No explanation. Just no. Nobody told them that even fluent Japanese speakers get treated differently the second their face doesn't match the majority. That they might be asked repeatedly, Nihongo daijoubu? Can you speak Japanese? Even after speaking it fluently for years. They didn't expect to feel invisible at work meetings, to be left out of group messages, or to be tolerated, but never fully accepted. And it's not just about language. It's about never quite being inside. That invisible boundary, the Achisoto line, makes you feel like no matter how long you live here, you're always on the outside looking in. That realization stings hardest when you're trying to build real relationships. Friendships can feel surface level. Dating? Even harder. Many foreigners report being seen more as a novelty than a person, someone to practice English with, or date for the sake of curiosity. But here's the part most people never say out loud. It's lonely. Not because there aren't people, but because you're never really part of it all. You exist parallel to the culture, not within it. So what do people wish they knew? They wish someone had told them it's okay to struggle, that culture shock doesn't just hit once, but in waves. They wish someone had warned them that integration takes years, not months, and that it may never feel complete. They wish someone had said, you're not failing, the system just wasn't built with you in mind. But they also wish they'd known the tools to fight back. That online communities exist. That language exchange cafes can be more than just places to learn, they can become lifelines. That there are support groups, legal aid hotlines, mental health services, and others just like them, all feeling the same things. And maybe most of all, they wish someone had told them that it's okay not to love everything about Japan, even if everyone back home expects you to. That you can respect the culture without romanticizing every part of it. That being critical doesn't mean being ungrateful. It just means you're human. And for every foreigner quietly going through the same struggles, those unspoken truths can make all the difference. Living in Japan as a foreigner often feels like walking a tightrope, balancing between embracing a new culture and holding on to your own identity. It's not about blending in so much as finding a way to belong without losing who you are. Many foreigners discover that adaptation doesn't mean erasing their past. Instead, it's about weaving their own culture into the Japanese fabric, creating something uniquely theirs. For some, that looks like cooking familiar dishes at home while celebrating Japanese holidays with coworkers. Others join international communities or start language exchange groups, where they can speak their native tongue and learn from others on the same journey. Then there's the quiet power of small rituals, reading a favorite book in your own language, video calling family back home, or sharing stories with friends about life in both worlds. These simple acts become anchors in a sea of change. At work, many foreign nationals find success by asking questions early and often, seeking mentors, and embracing curiosity about Japanese customs without judgment. This openness often leads to respect, and over time, deeper connections. But perhaps the most important lesson they learn is patience with the culture, with others, and most importantly, with themselves. Integration isn't instant, it's a process that happens in moments, sometimes slowly, sometimes unexpectedly. This balance, between adapting and staying true, can be the key to thriving in Japan. It transforms challenges into opportunities and isolation into connection. Because in the end, the goal isn't to disappear into the background, but to shine as your own bright, authentic self, right here, right now, in a place that's both new and home. Japan is a country of deep traditions, impressive innovations, and a unique social fabric woven over centuries. Yet, beneath this polished surface lies a complex reality for foreign nationals, one where inclusion is still a work in progress. The challenges are real: invisible social barriers, demanding work cultures, cultural isolation, and legal hurdles. But so is the resilience and adaptability of those who choose to make Japan home. The question remains, can Japan truly open its doors wide enough to embrace outsiders fully? The answer isn't simple. It requires shifts not just in policy, but in mindset, both by institutions and individuals. As the world grows more connected, Japan faces a choice: maintain its tightly knit traditions, or evolve into a society where diversity is celebrated, and every resident, native or foreign, feels seen and valued. For the foreigners living here, the journey continues, balancing respect for a rich culture with the desire to belong authentically. For Japan, the future hinges on how well it can bridge this divide. And for us watching, it's a reminder that inclusion is never automatic. It's earned, built piece by piece, through understanding, empathy, and change. So, what do you think? Can Japan break down the invisible walls and create a true home for everyone? Or will outsiders always remain just a little outside? The conversation is just beginning.